Hey guys, it's Andrew here. Welcome back to my second tutorial. Today we're going to be making this fun little magnetic voxel thing where we have a tiny little cube on top that pulls wherever is nearby. And we can adjust the height of the magnet, and then that kind of adjusts how strong the pulling is. But aside from that, it's a pretty simple patch, I would say. What I'm going to be teaching you is heavily inspired off of this person. The Instagram at is YFJSR. And yeah, they made this in Unreal Engine, and I think it's like MIDI controlled, which I think is super cool. Ours won't be MIDI controlled. But, you know, I still think that the math to make something like this seems pretty simple. And hopefully I do it justice. But yeah, super cool Instagram page. You should check them out. Okay, so before I get into teaching you guys how to build this patch, I'm going to go through my intuition on how I solve this problem. And what I mean by that is, how did I get from the video on the right to my patch on the left? And what math did I use? You don't need to know any math to build this patch, but if you're already here, you might as well learn a bit. It's going to be really fun. When I watched this video, I broke down this mechanism into two parts, right? So number one is that there is a floor, right? This floor is an 8x8 grid. And it moves up and down, right? And then the second part is this magnet, right? And the magnet moves around the grid, but never outside the grid, right? So there are a few things that we need to sort of think about, right? Number one, I would say, is how does the magnet move? And number two is how do the grids move, right? How do the individual tiles move up and down? Okay, so let's answer the first question on how the magnet will actually move. Here I have a 4x4 floor with essentially 16 tiles. We can give each tile a location. So let's say this is 0, 0, this is 1, 0, this is 2, 0, and then this could be 1, 1, could be 2, 2, so on and so forth, right? Now, all we really need to do to determine the magnet's location is we just need to, let's say that this green is our magnet, randomly sample at every single interval for that location. And that's it. That's as simple as it gets. If we have our floor, we can easily get our magnet location. And so in 3D, it might look something like this, where we have our magnet here, and then this distance right here is just h. So now that we have our magnet location, we can now figure out how tiles actually move. And hopefully you can already notice that the tile's movement really depends on where that magnet is, obviously. But also that the further away a tile is from that magnet, the less it is affected by the magnet's pull. So all that means is that the closer a tile is to a magnet, the more it moves upwards. All we need to do is just calculate these vectors by doing a simple subtraction and then getting the length, which is pretty easy to do in TouchDesigner. And so once we calculate each tile's magnitude from the magnet, we can replace this 4x4 grid with just how strong or how much the tile needs to move upwards. So for example, here it might look something like this. 4 being the strongest because we are the closest. The magnet is closest to this tile. And then everywhere else, well, this might be 3, and then this one might be like 2, so on and so forth. And all this grid is saying is that at the position 2, 1, move my tile 4 units upwards. So hopefully that gave you a bit of insight on how I'm actually going to make this patch. Aside from that, there's one more piece of information that I want to give you guys, which is that because of the way that we defined our magnet is going to be a location in XYZ space, where the first 2 coordinates are from our tile, right? So for example, we might have something like 2, 1, and then our third location, our Z, well, we just said that that was going to be H. Now in this case, H is purely cosmetic. All of the values that are making it grow are only dependent on the X and Y and not on the H. We're just going to make the illusion that it depends on H. Okay, so let's just get started by getting rid of everything here. And I'm going to bring in a constant chop. With this constant chop, I'm going to do a grid. That's just going to be the size of our floor. And then we're going to do a magnet height. For grid, we can set that to 8. And then for the magnet height, we want to be able to adjust this to increase the height of our magnet, but then also the pull strength. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my magnet height. And I'm going to select that twice. And the first one will be magnet height. The second one I'll rename to pull height. And with the magnet height, I'm just going to add a math. And we're going to change the range to be from 0 to 1 to, let's say, 0 to 0.5. And then for the second pull height, we can do the same thing. And we can do maybe something like 0 0.1, 0 0.5 to maybe 8. From there, I'm going to put a merge from my constant. I'm gonna change it from make unique to keep last. And I'm just gonna bring all of these together and add a null to the very end. So now when I change my magnet height, the pull strength also increases. Okay. So now that we have that, let's set up our grid. And our grid is just going to be made up of 2 ramps. Or I guess 1 ramp. So the first ramp, what we want is we want to go into our common tab and we're going to grab our grid resolution, or we're going to grab our grid and we're going to just drag that onto our resolution and chop reference it. Then we're going to go into our input smoothness, just bring this down to nearest pixels, and then use the format of 32-bit float RGBA. From there, we're going to get a flip, and we're going to flop it to the bottom left, and then we're going to reorder, and we're going to put this flip into the second input of our reorder, and we're just going to change the output green to be input 2, and then our output blue to be 0. And then we can drag a null and then just call that floor position. So one thing that you can do for this is actually we can highlight all of this and go into the common tabs and then go into nearest pixels, and now you can see very clearly that this is an 8x8 grid. And one other thing you can do is you can press your viewer active button down here and then hover over your node and then just press V, and you'll see that we have a nice grid from 0 to 1. Now, one thing that I do want to do though is I want to bring this into the middle of my of like the XY axis. So I'm going to add a point transform, and I'm just going to translate everything on my X and my Y, or my red and my blue channel, red and green channel, down by 0.5. just like so. And just like that. So one thing I do want to do though is I want to make sure that my grid is in the center. So what I can do here is I can add a point transform, and in my red and green channel, I'll just translate this by 0.5 and 0.5, just like so. Now, I don't want to actually see this, so I'm going to press V again and then turn on my viewer active, and great. So that is our floor position. Next, what we can do. So the next thing that we can do is we can go and create our instancing setup. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab a box, and then we're going to, oh, and one thing that you can do if you ever run out of space is press P to disable the parameters. It just is nice if you want extra room. But what we want is we want a transform, and then we want a null. So in our transform tab, I'm going to grab my grid size. I'm just going to drag it into my uniform scale. And then I'm going to do 1 divided by, and then add a bracket here, 0.1 plus, and then right here as well. So from there, I can chain a geometry. And I can also grab a camera and a constant material. And then from there, I can also grab a render. I'm going to set this render to be 32 X anti-alias. And then also I'm going to change the resolution to be 1080 by 1080. Now, from there, what we can do is we can go into our Geo tab and go into our instancing, turn on instancing, and we just grab our floor position and just do R, G, and B. Now we can chain a null, and also just insert a transform top, and we can change the background color to be 1. We can also comp over background, and then press this little blue button right here, and now we can have a nice little representation of all of our boxes. It's a bit hard to see, but for now that's okay. We'll change that a bit later. One more thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into 2. I'm going to drag this one a bit over. I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to click on top viewer, and then in my left hand side, I'm going to right click, go into display, and turn off backdrop tops. So now we just have our visual on the right hand side and nothing distracting over here. Okay, so now that we have our grid, we can now create our magnet. And our magnet is simply just by sampling a random square in our floor position. So what we're going to need is we're going to need a noise drop, and I'm going to change this to random. I'm going to change the amplitude to be 0.5 and my offset to be 0.5. And then in my seed, I'm going to type in math.floor tabs time.seconds. And so what that does is every single second, it gives me a random value. Now this is way too many values. So we only need one value. And the way that we're going to change that is we're going to actually first give X and Y channel names, because we're going to need 2 random values per tick. And then we're going to go into our start and end, change that to samples, and we're just going to go from 0 to 0. So now what we are essentially getting are random values from 0 to 1. What we can then do is we can go into our math. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my range, and I'm going to drag my grid positions here onto my 2 range. And I'm going to change this range to be from 2 to 8 minus 1. And this just ensures that we're not picking any of the edge values. We're only going to be picking values, yeah, just not on the edge, because it makes it look better. And another thing that we're going to do is after this math, we're going to add another one, and we're just going to round it so that we can get actual perfect integers. Last thing that we can do is we can add a null. And I'm just going to make this magnet sampler. So now that we have our magnet sampler, let's select our floor position. From our floor position, we're going to grab a crop. And we're going to change all of these to be pixel. And I'm going to drag my Y to be my crop top. And then I'm going to copy that onto my crop bottom, but subtract 1. So now for our Y, we're only selecting one row. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to crop our right with our X. We're going to do the same thing. So -1. So now what we have is we have a 8x8 floor, and our crop is selecting 1 pixel randomly from this grid. And then we're going to add a null, which essentially is our magnet position. We're going to grab a null, and we're going to call this magnet position real. And then we're going to chain another null, and we're going to call this one magnet position, just magnet position. And so the difference between these two is that this magnet position is going to have a blue channel value to it. And we're going to do that by chaining a constant. We're going to go into our output, and we're going to set resolution only. And then in our color, we're going to set 0, 0, and then we're going to go into our magnet height, drag that into here. And then I'm going to put a 0.5 as our default. Then we're going to add a reorder. I'm just going to change my output blue to be input 2. So now, with this magnet position, I'm going to copy and paste my geo node here. And I'm going to change this constant to be, I don't know, something like blue. Or, yeah, this color. And I'm going to, instead of using my floor positions, I'm just going to add a magnet position. And so now you'll see that we have a little magnet that is just randomly teleporting around our grid. And one thing that we can do with our magnet sampler is we can make this transition a little bit smoother with just a lag. So in our noise network, I'm going to add a lag. And I'm also going to just add a bit of an overshoot so that there's a slight jolt. Great. So from there, what we can do in our render setup quickly before we do anything else is we can add a bit more detail by chaining a SSAO. So with this SSAO, you're probably going to need to adjust it because this doesn't look too great. But luckily, I've already adjusted one for you. So you can just use this one. Just copy all of these and just chain that here. Now, so far, it still doesn't look great, but once we get our other things in motion, it'll look a lot more clear on what's happening. Okay, so now let's figure out how to actually create the pulling of this system. So if we want to create the pulling, we're going to need to grab two things. So I'm going to drag my floor position into my select 4, and I'm going to grab my magnet position real into my select 5. Then I'm going to grab a subtract. And we're going to put my select 5 into the first input and my select 4 into the second input. From there, I'm going to go into my common tab. I'm going to change this to nearest pixels, and I'm going to channel mask my alpha. From there, I'm going to grab a math. And we're going to grab the magnitude of this entire gradient by doing square, add, root. We're going to mask the alpha again. Then we're going to go into our input viewer, nearest pixels, and then 32-bit float mono, just like that. Now we're going to change that to a null, and we're going to call that floor scale. We're going to go into our Geo1. We're going to put that floor scale onto our Z only, like so. Now, a few things that we want to change for our square, for our box, is just we don't want this to grow on both sides. We only want it to grow upwards. So we're going to change our anchor to be 0. And now there's a more defined growth, I guess. Now, one thing to note is that this is kind of the opposite effect of what we want. We want our pulling to be the strongest where the magnet is. So we're going to just insert a level, and we're going to invert this. From there, what you can actually also do is chain a threshold. And we can just put this to 0.2 and 0.2. And you can adjust this to whatever you want. But this just gives like a bit of a masking to make the transition, at least to me, be a bit more smooth. And we can just multiply these two if we want. So another thing we can do is we can make this pulling more defined by inserting a lookup top. And then from this level, I'm going to grab a ramp. I'm going to go into my output. I'm going to do set resolution only. And I'm just going to bring this ramp into my second input and my lookup top. From here, what we can do is we can adjust this bar right here. And something that you want to be careful with for ramps, for some reason they're really buggy in TouchDesigner, so you can't really undo them. So if you have a ramp that you really like and you want to adjust to a new one, make sure to copy and paste it to save, like, I don't know, to save it basically. Anyways, so I'm going to add a value here, and I'm going to change this value to be, let's say, 4. And then here I can change this to be maybe 1. And then drag this a bit outwards like this. And here I'll add maybe a 0. Ooh, too high. Yeah. And I can also change this to be ease in, ease out, or might. So this is what we have. Again, this really depends on what you want for a shape of the pull. You can also just get rid of this completely. It's really up to you. I think I'm going to get rid of it because I actually don't like how it looks. Or, yeah. So I'm going to get rid of that for now. Okay, so now that we have our pulling mechanism working, one thing to note is that we can change how much things are getting pulled just by changing this ramp right here, the one that's connected to our lookup. So yeah, do what looks right for you, but I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm also going to add a comp in between my lookup and my floor scale, and I'm going to change this to be add. It's going to be red for now, but that's okay because we're going to add other stuff later. So one of the things that I want to add is I want to make the floor kind of bubble. And the way that I'm going to do that is by going into my ramp right here, copying it, pasting it. I'm going to change my phase to be, or my period to be a half. And then we're going to go into a displace. And with this displace, I want to be a half right here. I want my source midpoint to be 0 and 0. And I want my extend to be repeat. And then I'm going to copy this ramp again, actually. Change this back to 1. Change this to vertical. And then in my common tab, I'm going to change my X resolution to be 1. Also going to animate this with abs time.seconds. And I'm going to change the interpolation to be ease in, ease out. So from there, I'm going to do a transform as well. And I'm just going to transform this by 45 degrees. And really doesn't matter which one you choose, just choose repeat or mirror. It's up to you. I'm going to go with repeat. And yeah, so if I press viewer active and D, I'll get a pixel view of it. But we basically just get this random texture that goes up and down. From there, I'm just going to chain a null. And I'm going to bring this into my comp. Now, again, you can really just play around with this to see what sort of works for you. But yeah, now we have a bubbly floor. Okay. And of course, what we can do as well is before this null, we could also add a math. And this math, we could go into our multiply. And this multiply can control how much bubbliness we want. So I'm going to change that to 0.5 for now. And now we can move on to the next thing. Now what I want is I want my magnet to pull a lot stronger when it's directly above some grids. And the way that we go about that is first I'm going to change these two notches to be 2 and 1.2. This way that we can have more space to add that growth that we want. So next what we want to do is we want to grab my select top, and we're just going to grab this gradient. And what we want is we want to select only the cubes that are, I guess black in this scenario. And the way that we can do that is with the threshold. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this threshold to be greater. I'm going to change this to be 0.05. And I'm going to soften this by 1. Then I'm going to add a noise. And with this noise, I'm going to abs time animate it. And then in the output, I'm going to do input times noise. And then I'm going to add a limit. And what I don't want is I don't want this to be negative. Because I don't want my noise to shrink my cubes. So I'm going to not clamp. I'm going to zigzag the minimum. And I'm just going to put that to be 0, like so. From there, we can add a null. And we're just going to change that into. So right now it's super subtle, but what we can do is we can add a math, just like how we did before, and we can multiply. And so one thing to change about this as well is this is really random, and I think it's a bit too random. So if you want to get rid of that, just increase the period. I'm going to increase it by 10. And so yeah, now we have this value that we can adjust. And this is kind of perfect because we can increase this as our magnet height goes up to give the illusion of pulling. And so I'm going to go into my null one, and I'm just going to drag my pull height into here. So now what we get is we get this fun little thing. Just like so. So I'm going to change that just to be like 0.5 for now. So another thing that I'm not a big fan of is I think that this is quite jittery, and I want to slow that down a bit. So we can do that easily by bringing this comp into a chop by doing top 2. And what we want to do is we want to output as single channel set. Then we go into our crop and we do full image. Then we go and get a lag. And we want to lag per sample. And if this is laggy, just turn off these viewers. But yeah, then we can pull a null into here. And we can then go back into chops. And we're going to just do RGBA and fit to square. And so now it's a bit smoother when it grows up and down, which I like a lot. And you can just mess around with this lag to your desired choppiness or smoothness. So lastly, what we need to do is just add some coloring. And what we want is we want the voxels that are closer to the magnet to be a different color than everywhere else. And we can achieve that simply by selecting our null 5. And I'm also going to lag it the same way that we did with the scaling. And we just select all of these, copy them, and paste them. And we just want to drag this top to here, and then this chop to here. Then we're going to grab a constant, and this constant is just going to multiply this texture with some color. I'm going to just choose this yellow right here. Now I'm going to add another constant, and this constant, instead of multiplying, it's going to add to everything in this texture. So that will change all of this black to be an actual color. I'm going to choose this color right here, and I'm just going to set this to be add, like so. And there we have it. Now I can put a null here, call this floor color, and that should be good. We can drag this onto our second tab of our instancing. And there we go. Now we have a lovely little coloring, which changes with our magnet height. So there we have it. That's our finished voxel grid mechanism. It just follows our magnet, which I think is really fun. I'm gonna add one more thing, but I'm not gonna be able to explain it too well because it was just me purely messing around, but it's just the background that we want. So I'm gonna just do that by selecting my floor position. And we're going to crop this with 3 by 3. Just like so. Then what we're gonna do is we're going to grab our ramp system right here. We're gonna recreate it. So now what we're gonna do is instead of it being 8 by 8 in our ramp 5, instead of it being 8 by 8, we're just gonna change this to be 3 by 3, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to then do a math. I'm going to multiply this by 10. Then I'm going to do another math. I'm going to divide everything by 1/3, or multiply everything by 1/3, and I'm going to round. What this should give me is a nice little index where it's 0, 0 in the center, and then 1 outwards, 1 upwards, 1 backwards, and we're going to add this to our crop, like so. And we want to, again, do nearest pixels, so. And here we've just increased our grid to span a bit more, which I guess doesn't really mean that much for now, but we're going to change that. So this is going to be, I don't know, we can call this floor position new. And we're going to use this to create the rest of our backgrounds. So we can do that by also selecting our floor scale. And we're going to do the same thing where we're going to crop this again with 3 by 3. But this time we just want it to be 0. Like so. And we want this scaling to be in the center. So we're going to transform this using pixels. And we're going to move this 8 by 8. So now it's in the middle. So, and we're going to call this floor scale new. Now the next one that we're going to need to get is our color. So we're going to select our floor coloring. And we're just going to do the exact same thing. Going to crop 3 by 3, 0. Then we're going to transform 8 by 8. Oh, whoopsies. Gotta make sure those are pixels. So 8 by 8. Bring it into the center. And now what we can do with this one is we can add a constant. And this constant we're going to set as resolution only. And we can choose any color. I'm going to go with this blue. Then I'm going to add a noise. And with this noise, we're going to just do input times noise, like so. I'm going to bring the period up to 1.5. Going to increase this amplitude by 1. This offset by 1, like so. Then we're going to put a over, like so. And then we're going to call this floor color new. So with these three, what we can do is we can replace our instances. So I'm going to get rid of this floor position. I'm going to change it to this. And we're going to change this one to here. Then we're going to change this one to here, like so. Wow. Ain't that cool? Okay. So now what we want is we want certain values to be moving upwards. And so we can do that simply by selecting this noise right here. And we're just going to do a threshold. And with this threshold, we just want to mask a certain amount. It's really up to you. You can increase even more if you want to, just by holding down this threshold option, and it'll bring up a wheel, and you can just go more or less than what you actually want. So I'm gonna say 1.05, like so. And with this threshold, I'm going to multiply with sorry, I'm not going to multiply. I'm going to add a noise. And I'm going to multiply that noise like this. And I'm going to animate that with apps time seconds. Okay, so now that we have this thresholded noise, what this threshold is doing is it's selecting color values that are over a specific amount. So right now I'm selecting only the super white ones. And then with this noise, what we can do is we can go into our transform right here. We can press over. And we can put this over with this noise right here and replace it like so. Now, again, depending on how much you want, you can increase or decrease the amount that moves upwards. And also, we can also insert a math in between our noise and our over, just like so, to really increase the heights if we wanted. I'm just gonna go something like this. And yeah, this noise, you can also change the seed if you don't like the one that we're using. And you can also just change the color as well. But again, if you change the color, since this threshold is picking up values from our noise, you'll have to adjust the threshold. Just like so. But yeah, like, wow, that's way too much. Even that's way too much. So we would have to go even more. But yeah, that's basically my tutorial. One other thing that we can do is we can rotate our geometry just by going into our XForm tab in our geometry and typing in abs time.seconds 12. But now remember, you want to rotate both geometries. So just copy paste that into our second one, like so. Oh, and one thing to add, just to make sure that this is all still like somewhat dynamic, I think, is in these two transforms, transform 4 and transform 5, we want to actually translate by the grid amount, which is what we were doing, but we should specify that with the chop reference. So put that into here. And why that's important is I believe now this should grow with our grid amount, like so. So yeah. Yeah, oh my god, look how cute that is. Okay. Anyways, that is basically my tutorial. I think my last thing that I do want to sort of add is maybe some post-processing, but again, I really wish I could teach you guys post-processing, but I don't know what I'm doing half the time. So let me just grab what I have here and just bring it into here. So one thing that you can do if you're ever downloading a tutorial file and you want to know what is being changed, press this little button right here and it just says non-default parameters only. So when you press this button, when it's a little tiny circle, that means the only things that it will be showing are the things that have been changed. Which is great because that means is I can just show you guys what I did because I don't know what I'm doing for this stuff. But that looks cool, right? It looks cool. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. That's my tutorial. Let me know what you guys thought about it, how my explanations were, and whether or not this was too much information or not. Aside from that, if you did enjoy it, please leave a like, subscribe to my YouTube, follow me on Instagram. I also have a Patreon where I'll upload the tutorial file and then also another version of that file that's a bit more detailed that I wasn't able to actually teach because I think it would have been way too long. And also, if you do recreate it, please play around with it and let me know what you get. Post it on Instagram and share it with me, tag me, let me know. I would love to see it. For things that you can mess around with. This one section right here, which is just the beginning of our floor scale. A few things. This magnitude calculation, you can really mess around with which value you choose. For example, if you choose subtract instead, you get an X. Another thing that you can change is this ramp that is connected to the lookup. For example, you could change this to be like 10 on this side, and then, I don't know, like -2 here. Really up to you. But yeah, if you want to get good at TouchDesigner, please, please, please experiment. Delete random things and ask yourself what is happening. Oftentimes you might not be able to answer it, but when you do it enough times, you hopefully can create like your own intuition on what's going on, and that will help you create cool things on your own. But yeah, thank you guys.